Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. My name is Dr. Ghazwa Korayem, and on behalf of the SCAPE platform team, I would like to discuss today this topic of the research loading dose introduction writing. So before we start, I'd like to first go over the structure of the scientific paper. So the scientific paper overall looks like an hourglass. As you can see, it starts broad with the context of the literature review, going narrow when we go to the method section and results section, and then we broaden again when we go into the discussion part and we end with the conclusion. So we always say that the structure of a scientific paper looks like an hourglass, as we can see in here. It starts with an introduction where we type the relevant literature, explain why we're doing this study, and then we identify the gap that is available in the literature that made us do this study, or in another word, we say rationale. And then we move into the material and method results section, discussion, and at the end we go broad back with the conclusion and clinical implication. For the purpose of this presentation, we will focus only on the introduction, as you can see here, and we will talk about the steps of writing an introduction in a scientific paper. The steps of writing a research paper usually starts with the method. We should already have a proposal ready where it has a lot of parts of the introduction already completed, but it might need an update when you're writing the manuscript, since the proposal might be written a few months ago and some literature came up on the same topic. So we start with the method, which should be exactly as written as of the proposal, moving into the results, what we could find from the results after the analysis, and then the discussion, and then moving into the introduction part. So usually it's preferred to start with the introduction at the end of the paper, not at the beginning, but sometimes we do them in parallel, or start with the introduction with the as we start with the scientific paper. So what is an introduction? Introduction is a section that clarifies the motivation, why we're doing this paper, why we chose this topic, why is it important, why do we need to solve this problem. All of that should be conveyed or written clearly in the introduction. What is the purpose of an introduction? Is to provide a background information, solid background about the topic that we're going to discuss, about the problem that we're going to discuss. It helps the reader to understand the paper and also appreciate the importance of doing such a study. Identify what is the rationale of the study, as we always call it, and also the question of the study should be stated clearly at the objective at the end of the introduction section, or the hypothesis. So what are the steps of writing an introduction? It actually starts by selecting the relevant literature. By relevant literature, we're saying studies that looked into the similar problem. Usually it's preferred to start an introduction with a review article that kind of goes over the most of the studies that address this problem, if it's available. Meta-analysis or systematic review can be helpful to identify studies that could be incorporated in the introduction or the discussion later on. You have to read and understand the gathered literature. It's not about regurgitation of the information that you obtain from the literature review. So it is really important to understand what the results are saying, or what's the finding are saying, in order to critique it ourselves and rephrase it in our own words. And here I present some helpful resources that can help you into reading and understanding the literature. After that, we need to structure an outline for an introduction. That is really helpful, kind of lay out the blueprint or the things that you want to cover, kind of a checklist that you make sure that you do not forget main points in the introduction. And then you include the highlights from the literature that you found in the literature review that you did at the beginning. Not necessarily all, but maybe the findings that you could see relevant to the problem that you're going to discuss, and you need to rephrase it in your own words to avoid plagiarism. So what is the introduction outline? Usually, and this is not a set stone, but usually there are 3 paragraphs in the introduction. It could be even narrowed down to 2 paragraphs in some of the journals, but you want to introduce in the first paragraph the topic. Why is it important? Emphasize the importance of that topic. Then you present the research niche. You mean what is the problem that is available in the literature, and compare and present what the literature could found relevant to that problem in the literature review, and then describe the problem that need to be addressed. In another word, gap in the literature, the rationale, or an objective. And you can see here an example of an introduction section where you prepare the reader about the background information relevant. As I mentioned, it's an hourglass, but it usually depends how broad you want to start. At the beginning, when we used to write about COVID, we used to introduce COVID. It's an RNA virus, but now it's already known. COVID is very well known, so we don't need to start by this introduction, since it's becoming a known fact. You can start immediately with the problem, and we will go over an example here. So here is an example of some of the published paper that we had in the SCAPE platform. And as you can see, you can start, as you can see, we always talk about the funnel shape, but it really depends if you want to start from the funnel, in the funnel from the real top, or you want to start from narrowing down, maybe not so top at the funnel. So you can have a statement or two about the importance of COVID, when it starts, the mortality related to that, and then you can start laying out the problem and the literature found relevant to that topic. Like in here, we're talking about inhaled corticosteroids, so we're talking about the systematic inflammatory response that is available in critically ill, and now we're looking into agents that can counteract that effect, and some of the suggested agent will be inhaled corticosteroids based on evidence, and we mention some of those evidence. And then we go into the problem. So in here, we finished with the niche, we go into the problem, like the role of inhaled corticosteroids is associated, have been questioned. So now it's there is a problem, especially in COVID-19. And then we can state here the objective of our study. I'm not going to read this. The full article is also available here. You can look at it. I picked some parts of that introduction in order to present it here as an example. So what are the introduction do's that we want to make sure to follow? Use present tense in terms of grammar. The length, as I mentioned, 2 to 3 paragraphs maximum. Cite reviews and studies that could make the reader wants to look more about this topic. It should be funnel shaped, as we mentioned, moving from general to specific. The flow between the sentence need to be logic. I usually see it fragmented, so we want to avoid that fragmentation. Usually using transition can help with that, but also overuse of transitional words could lead to losing the meaning of the sentence there. So we need to ensure that the statements are complete and meaningful. Do not overuse a transition, as I mentioned. Check spelling and grammar, and also reference every statement. What I always see that several statements have the same reference. So usually when authors write, they leave the reference at the end of that the last statement. However, with each full stop, and sometimes even with comma, you can have reference if it's different than the remaining of the sentence. But usually with each full stop, you want to remember to have a reference or one or more related to that statement, unless it's a known fact. What are the don'ts? Do not write a complete literature review. Leave some for the discussion to compare and contrast with your findings. Don't use too long paragraphs or too long sentences. The research question should be clear, not vague, not very broad. It need to be specified, and the rationale need to be identified. And also avoid plagiarism. Make sure to rewrite the statements or the finding using your own words. So also at the end, you can have kind of a content checklist to make sure if you had an outline from the beginning, I believe that you would be meeting all of those checklists or checking them at the end. The outline could help from the beginning. So you have to check if you had a sufficient background, you introduced and explained the rationale of the study, the introduction is clearly identifying the questions or the objectives. This could help you at the end. At the end, also, I want to share some additional writing resources that could be helpful. Here are some transition sources. And here some general guides, not only specific for the introduction, but you can refer to them for the introduction. Useful guidelines, useful writing guidelines for English, for grammar. This is the equator is very helpful for all type of research where it has a checklist depending on the type of the study. With that, I would like to conclude my presentation about introduction writing. I hope it was very helpful for you, and thank you so much on behalf of SCAPE platform team. I would like to thank you, and we look forward for the remaining videos or remaining loading those. Thank you so much.